The doorbell rang at 8:47 on Christmas Eve. I know the time because I checked my phone when I heard it, the automatic gesture of a host tracking the evening. My mother was in the kitchen putting the final touches on the dessert. My father was in the armchair reading in his particular deliberate way that means he has been reading the same paragraph for 20 minutes because he is actually listening to everything happening around him. And my husband Thomas's chair was empty because Thomas had texted 40 minutes earlier to say he was running late, something had come up, he'd be there by 9. I was not alarmed by this. Thomas ran late. It had been, over the 6 years of our marriage, one of his most consistent qualities, a particular disregard for other people's time that I had long since stopped taking personally and had begun planning around, the way you plan around weather. When the doorbell rang at 8:47 I assumed it was Thomas, having lost his keys again, which was the second most consistent quality of our marriage. I was almost smiling when I went to the door. I opened it. He was there. And beside him, close enough that they had clearly arrived together, close enough that the body language of arriving together was unmistakable to anyone who has ever watched two people arrive at a door, was a woman I had never seen before. She was wearing a red coat. Dark hair. A small bag over one shoulder, the kind of bag you bring to someone else's party. The kind of bag that says I was invited here. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Thomas. Her expression had the quality of someone who has just arrived somewhere and is reading the room, taking the first steps toward understanding what kind of evening this is going to be. I looked at Thomas. Thomas was looking at a point somewhere slightly to the left of my face. The specific non-meeting of eyes of a man who has committed to a thing and is now in the first moments of living with the commitment. Behind me I heard my father set down his book. I want to slow down here, because the next 10 seconds are the ones I've replayed the most, and they deserve their own careful telling. Thomas said, "Hey. Sorry I'm late." Not "this is a colleague." Not "let me explain." Not a sentence that contained any information I needed or any acknowledgement of the woman standing in the doorway of my home beside him. Just, "Sorry I'm late." The specific sentence of a man who has decided that if he does not name the thing is not required to be named. I looked at the woman in the red coat. She was looking at me now. And her expression had changed, the arriving at a party quality was gone, replaced by something more alert and more searching. She was looking at the way I was standing in my own doorway. She was looking at the wreath on the door behind me that I had hung myself 2 weekends ago. She was looking at the hallway visible over my shoulder, at the Christmas tree in the corner with the particular ornaments that accumulate over the years of a marriage, at the evidence, visible from the door, unavoidable, of a home and a life that did not have a guest role written in it for her. She looked back at Thomas. "Who is this?" she said. Her voice was careful. Very careful. The voice of someone who has just understood that a question they should have asked earlier is now being answered whether they asked it or not. "This is May," Thomas said. Like I was someone being introduced at a party. "This is May. 6 years. My house. Christmas Eve. This is May." The woman looked at me. "Are you his wife?" she said. I want to tell you about the specific quality of silence that filled my hallway at that moment, because it was unlike any silence I have experienced before or since, a silence with texture, with weight, with the particular quality of a room full of people all breathing at different rates and none of them knowing what comes next. Behind me, in the armchair, my father had gone completely still. My mother had appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a dish towel, and her face had the expression that faces have when the mind is processing something faster than the face can respond. Thomas said nothing. I said, "Yes." The woman in the red coat closed her eyes. Just for a moment. A small, contained moment of closing, the expression of someone receiving information they had suspected but hoped not to confirm, and confirming it. When she opened her eyes again, something in her face had shifted. The careful alertness was gone. In its place was something cleaner and in some ways colder, the expression of a person who has made a rapid and complete reassessment of a situation and knows exactly where she stands. She looked at Thomas. "You told me you were separated," she said. Thomas opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. Quiet. Absolute. The kind of don't that ends rather than begins a sentence. I need you to not say anything right now. She looked at me. I'm so sorry, she said. And the thing about it, the thing I have thought about since, in the months of unpacking this night, was that I believed her. Not because she performed it well, not because it was the right social response to the situation. Because her face had the quality of genuine shock, the particular quality of a person who has discovered they were a participant in something they didn't consent to, and who understands that the damage done to the woman in front of them is damage they were used to cause without their knowledge. You should go, I told her. Quietly. No anger at her, the anger was not hers. She looked at me for one more moment. Then she turned and walked back to the car she'd arrived in, without another word to Thomas, without looking back. Thomas watched her go. Then he looked at me. I stepped back from the doorway. Come in, I said. We're going to talk. My father rose from his chair. Not dramatically, he simply stood, in the unhurried way of a man who has been waiting for something and has now seen it arrive. He crossed the living room. He came to stand beside me at the door. Thomas stepped inside. My father put his hand on my shoulder. The hand of a man who knows exactly what he's doing. And then he leaned in and he said 5 words, quietly, just for me, just above my ear, in a voice that Thomas, who was removing his coat with the performance of normalcy, could not hear. The house is in my name. 5 words. I stood in my own hallway and felt the architecture of the evening, of the entire marriage, of the last 18 months in particular, rearrange itself completely. I need to give you the history of those 5 words before I tell you what happened in the rest of that evening, because without the history they are just a fact, and with the history they are something else, the most significant thing my father has ever done for me, done so quietly that I did not fully understand it was being done. 18 months ago, Thomas and I had refinanced the house. Interest rates had moved into a window that made refinancing sensible. This was Thomas's analysis, and the analysis was correct, and I had gone along with it the way I went along with most of Thomas's financial decisions, which is to say I understood them in outline and trusted his judgment on the details. My father came to visit the weekend after the refinancing paperwork was filed. He had driven 4 hours, which he sometimes did without a specific occasion, and I had been glad to see him and had not thought too hard about the timing. After dinner, while Thomas was on a call in the study, my father sat with me at the kitchen table and said he wanted to talk about the house. I told him it was fine. The refinancing had gone smoothly, the terms were good, Thomas had handled it well. My father was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking, he said, about whether the ownership structure is right. What do you mean? I said. The house is in both your names, he said. I'd like to suggest putting it into mine. As a protective trust, held for you. Your name on the beneficial interest, mine on the deed, structured so that it passes to you outright under defined conditions. I looked at him. Dad. Why would we do that? He was quiet for a moment in the way he is quiet when he is saying something in the space between words. Because you'd asked me once, years ago, what I wished someone had done for your mother after her first marriage ended, he said. And I told you then that I wished someone had protected the house. I thought about what he wasn't saying. You're worried about Thomas, I said. I'm your father, he said. It's my job to see things before you do. We had a longer conversation. I asked questions he answered carefully. The arrangement he was proposing was legal, was documented, was structured so that I retained full beneficial ownership and full use of the property and could convert it back to my own name at any time with a single process. What it meant, in practical terms, was that in the event of a divorce, the house was not in the marital estate in the way it would otherwise have been. It was protected. Thomas never mentioned it. I do not know whether he knew. The paperwork had been filed through my father's lawyer, and the change was not something that appeared prominently in any documents Thomas would have routinely seen, and I had not raised it with Thomas because I had not known how to raise the conversation that surrounded it. 18 months later, Thomas walked through the front door of my home on Christmas Eve with a woman who believed she was visiting the apartment of a separated man. And my father, who had been waiting in the armchair for this or something like it, stood up and told me that the house was in his name. I want to be honest about what I felt when he said it, because it was complicated. The first thing was relief. A specific, structural relief, the kind you feel when you realize that the ground under your feet is solid when you were afraid it was going to give way. Whatever happened next, I would not lose my home. Thomas could not leverage the house. He was not in a position to tell me to leave and mean it legally, because the house he would be trying to leave me in was not his to act upon. The second thing was grief. Because the relief was only possible because my father had seen something coming that I had refused to see for 18 months. He had sat at my kitchen table and he had looked at my marriage with clear eyes and he had acted on what he saw without telling me the full reason, to protect me from having to carry the knowledge of what he suspected. And he had been right. The third thing, and this one is harder to name, was something like love, but the specific kind that arrives in the middle of a terrible moment, the kind you are almost ashamed to feel because the context is so wrong. My father had seen me. He had seen what was coming for me before I could see it myself, and he had done the one concrete thing in his power to protect me, and he had done it quietly, without making me feel surveilled or doubted, without ever once saying I don't trust your husband. He had just acted. I had been loved this well my entire life and I had not always understood the shape of it. Sit down, I said to Thomas. He sat. On the couch he had chosen when we furnished the living room, beneath the painting we had bought on our 3rd anniversary, in the home he had brought a woman to on Christmas Eve. He sat with the expression of a man who had made a very large error and was now calculating how to reduce it. My mother had disappeared back into the kitchen, which was her way. She processes difficulty by doing something with her hands, and the kitchen gave her hands something to do. My father stood in the doorway between the living room and the hall, not sitting, not intervening. Present. The specific presence of a man who will not let his daughter face this alone but who understands it is not his to manage. How long? I said. Thomas looked at his hands. May. I'm asking you one question at a time, I said. How long? About 8 months, he said. 8 months. We had been to Portugal in month 6. We had celebrated our anniversary in month 4. I had spent month 3 trying to understand why the distance between us had grown and had blamed myself for it, my work hours, my distraction, my failure to notice he needed something I wasn't giving him. I had spent 3 months apologizing internally for a distance that was his choice, his secret, his other life. Does she know how long? I said. He looked up. The woman you brought here tonight, I said. Does she know you've been with her for 8 months while being married to me? She thinks, he stopped. She thinks you're separated, I said. She told me. How long has she thought that? He didn't answer. Thomas, I said, and my voice had the specific quality it gets when I have run out of patience for being gentle with someone who isn't earning it. I am asking you a direct question and I am going to need a direct answer. Since the beginning, he said. Quietly. The quietness of a man whose strategies have run out. I will tell you what I did not do at that point. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I did not say the things that were in me to say, which were considerable, which were the accumulated contents of 6 years of a marriage I had been building in earnest while he was building something else alongside it. I had always been told I was too controlled in arguments, that I should say what I actually felt rather than managing the temperature of every room I was in. For once I was grateful for the controlling of temperature. The temperature in that room needed managing. What I said was, I'd like you to go to a hotel tonight. We'll deal with the house and the lawyers in the new year. Thomas looked at me. Then at the room. Then at my father in the doorway. The house, he said slowly. Some part of him was beginning to do the calculation. May, this is my father will explain the ownership structure, I said. Whenever you're ready. My father's expression, across the room, was not the expression of a man who had won something. It was the expression of a man who had hoped very much to be wrong and was not wrong, and who was doing what needed to be done because his daughter needed him to. Thomas looked at him. My father said, calmly, the property was transferred to a protective trust 18 months ago. May retains full beneficial interest. I'm happy to have my lawyer speak with yours in the new year. Thomas said nothing for a long moment. Then he went to get his coat. He left at 10 o'clock. Not immediately. There was a period of approximately 40 minutes between the conversation and his actual departure, during which he sat in the armchair my father had vacated. My father had moved to the kitchen with my mother, giving us a room but staying in the house, and cycled through several postures, the conciliatory one, the aggrieved one, the one that attempted to reframe the evening as a misunderstanding, and finally the quietly defeated one that preceded the coat-getting. I want to be fair to Thomas here, in the same way I have been trying to be fair to him throughout the process of this story, because fair is the thing I owe him and also the thing I owe myself. He is not a cartoon. He is not a man whose entire character was revealed as monstrous by one night. He is a person who made a sustained, deliberate choice to deceive two people at once, who convinced himself it was manageable, who brought the deception to its inevitable conclusion by walking it through the front door of his wife's home on Christmas Eve, and who is now beginning to understand the cost of all of those choices. I do not think he is unredeemable as a person. I also do not think he is redeemable as a husband, and those are different assessments that I have spent some time learning to hold simultaneously. The conciliatory posture involved words like understand and sorry, and I know this looks bad. I let him use them. I did not engage with them, because the time for engaging with those words had passed sometime around month 1 of the 8 months he'd been conducting an affair, and I had missed that window, and it was closed now. The aggrieved posture was briefer and did not serve him well. It produced, at one point, the sentence, "You have to admit things between us haven't been right for a long time." I looked at him for a moment. I said, "Things between us haven't been right because you were conducting an affair. The cause of the problem is not the same as the problem." He did not return to the aggrieved posture after that. The reframing attempt was the most elaborate and the least convincing, and I will spare you its details because the attempt was not in good faith and does not deserve careful description. The defeated posture arrived when he had run out of the other ones. He sat in the armchair and he looked at the Christmas tree and he was quiet for a long time. "I didn't mean for it to get here," he said. "I know," I said. And I did know, or I believed it, which is close enough. I don't think Thomas had a plan. I think Thomas made a series of choices that he told himself were manageable, that accumulated into a situation he had lost control of, and that he had walked through my front door that night partly because he had run out of other options and partly because some part of him, some part he probably hasn't examined clearly yet, needed it to be over in a way that required someone else to end it. He had needed me to see it so that it would be finished. I was not going to say that to him that night. Maybe someday. Maybe never. I put it in the category of things I understood and did not need him to confirm. At 10 o'clock he picked up his bag, the overnight bag he had brought, which I had not asked about and which told me that he had known, before he arrived, that he was not going to be staying, and he put on his coat and he looked at me from the doorway. "I am sorry," he said. The final version. The real one, or as close to real as the evening allowed. "I know," I said again. He left. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway, in my house, on Christmas Eve, and I listened to the car start in the driveway and pull away. Then I listened to the silence that came after. And in the silence I heard my mother in the kitchen, the specific sound of her beginning to make tea, and my father's footsteps crossing from the kitchen doorway toward me. He came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there the way he had stood in the living room doorway, present, containing the room, making it possible for me to fall apart by ensuring that if I did there would be someone to catch it. I didn't fall apart. Not yet. That was for later, for the nights that followed, for the weeks ahead when the reality of it would land in waves. That night I was too freshly in it to collapse. I was still operating in the clear, cold state of someone who is managing a situation and has not yet finished managing it. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" he said. "The house," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I hoped I'd never need to tell you," he said. "I hoped you'd never need to know why I did it." "But you knew," I said. "I thought I saw something," he said. "I wasn't certain. I didn't want to be certain." He paused. "Your mother thought I was overreacting." I almost laughed. The kind of laugh that comes out of the wrong part of you, the part that has been carrying tension for too long and needs to release it somewhere. "Did you tell her tonight?" "She figured it out," he said. Around the time your father's lawyer will speak to yours moment. I did laugh this time. Quiet, short, the specific laugh of a horrible situation that has also, in some strange way, produced moments of such clarity that the clarity itself becomes briefly funny. Let's go have some dessert, my father said. My mother's dessert was a trifle, which she makes every Christmas Eve and which I have eaten every Christmas Eve since I was 3 years old and which tasted, that night, more intensely like itself than it ever had. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, and we ate trifle, and my mother told us about a problem she'd had at the garden center that week with a delivery of pots that had arrived in entirely the wrong color, and my father made the face he makes when my mother describes minor injustices, and I sat between them eating trifle on Christmas Eve in the house that was mine. It was the most I had felt held in years. I want to tell you something about that feeling, because it is the part of this story I think matters most and also the part one struggle most to describe. I had spent 6 years in a marriage that I had been building in earnest, investing in, tending, making decisions for and around, structuring my life to accommodate and support. I had spent 6 years believing that structure was holding me up. It had not been holding me up. It had been requiring me to hold it up. And underneath it, without my knowing, without ever asking me to acknowledge it or be grateful for it, my father had been maintaining the actual floor. The floor had never been Thomas. The floor had been my father, who had seen what I couldn't see and had done the one thing he could do to protect me and had then gone back to his armchair and waited and said nothing and hoped he was wrong. He was not wrong. The trifle was excellent. I want to tell you about the next morning. I had expected not to sleep. I had a whole night of sleeplessness planned, the lying awake, the running of scenes through the mind, the arrival of grief in its various forms at various hours. I have always been a planner, including of my own suffering, and I had fully planned for the Christmas Eve insomnia. I fell asleep at midnight and slept until 7:30. I don't know what to make of this, even now. I think my body understood something my mind hadn't finished processing, that the worst night of my marriage was also, in some sense, a night of completion. Not a resolution, nothing was resolved, there was a divorce ahead of me, a legal process, the telling of people, months of things that would be hard. But the lie was over. The parallel life Thomas had been running alongside ours had collapsed, and the collapse had happened in my house, on my terms, with my father standing in the doorway. I had been protected. I woke up at 7:30 on Christmas morning and I lay in the bed that was mine, in the house that was mine, and I listened to the house and the house was quiet in the particular way that houses are quiet on Christmas morning, a specific, loaded quiet, the quiet of a day set apart. I got up. I put on the dressing gown that was too large, the one I had taken from Thomas's side of the wardrobe some months ago because I liked the weight of it and he never wore it and now it was simply mine, which is a small detail but which felt significant that morning. I went downstairs. My father was already in the kitchen. Of course he was. He has always been an early riser, earlier than everyone, the person who has already made the coffee before anyone else has considered waking up. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug and the newspaper he had brought with him, reading in his particular deliberate way that meant he was actually listening to the house. He looked up when I came in. "Coffee's made," he said. "I know," I said. "You always make it." We sat together in the early Christmas morning, my father and I, and we drank coffee and we talked and we didn't talk, the two registers of a good relationship, the things said and the silences that don't require filling. He asked how I was. I told him honestly, strange. Not devastated, which surprised me. Strange, which is its own thing. He said, "Strange is reasonable." "I keep thinking about her," I said. "The woman in the red coat." "What about her?" "She didn't know," I said. "She walked up to that door thinking something entirely different about the evening. She didn't know I existed." "No," he said. "She didn't." I don't know what to do with that," I said. "She was wronged too." My father looked at his coffee. "Some situations don't have one victim." "I know," I said. "I'm not saying she and I are in the same position. We're not. But she came to that door believing something, and what she found destroyed it, and she had nothing to do with creating the situation. He used her without her consent, the same way he used me without mine. I thought about her face when she understood. The closed eyes. The single-contained moment before she reopened them and looked at Thomas. The don't that ended every possible thing he might have tried to say. She handled it with dignity, I said. So did you, my father said. I called her. This is the part of the story that people find surprising, and I understand why, but I want to explain it because the explanation is more important than the surprise. I found her name through Thomas's phone. He had left it on the kitchen counter when he went to get his coat, the same way Owen had left his phone in Vera's kitchen, the same way these things always seem to happen, as though objects conspire to make the truth available when the truth is needed. I found her name in his contacts. I found her on a public professional profile. I sent her a brief message. I said, I don't want anything difficult between us. I want you to know I'm not angry at you. I believe you didn't know. If you want to talk, I'm available. She replied in 2 hours. Her name was Celeste. She was 31, which was 4 years younger than me, and she had been told from the first week that Thomas was in the process of separating from a marriage that had ended in everything but paperwork. She had asked about the paperwork 3 times over 8 months. Each time he had told her it was complicated, that there were legal delays, that it was almost finished. There were no legal delays. There was no paperwork. There had been no separation. We spoke for 40 minutes. I will not give you the full conversation because some of it was hers to keep, and some of it was too raw for any platform, and some of it was the specific kind of honest that exists only between 2 people who have been used by the same person and are trying to understand what they were each holding. What I will tell you is how the call ended. She said, I'm sorry. I know that probably doesn't mean much. It means something, I said. I'm sorry too. Not for what happened, neither of us caused this. I'm sorry the same person did this to both of us. She was quiet. He told me you'd stopped loving each other years ago, she said. We had a difficult patch, I said. About 1.5 years ago. His business had problems. We went to Portugal together in month 6 of whatever he and you were. It was a good trip. I paused. I thought we were building something back. She was quiet for a long time. I'm so sorry, she said again. And then, in the voice of someone who has made a decision, I hope the house is everything you need it to be. I understood, from the specificity of it, that she knew something about the house. That Thomas had told her something, had perhaps described it as his, had perhaps offered it as a future. That the house being in my father's name was a fact that had consequences for her picture of the future too. It's my home, I said. It will stay that. Good, she said. It should. We did not become friends. I want to be clear about that because stories like this one sometimes suggest a sisterhood that doesn't quite fit the reality. We were not friends. We were 2 people who had been wronged by the same person and who chose to speak to each other with honesty rather than hostility, which is a different and smaller but still real thing. She sent me a Christmas card 3 weeks later. Not a card with a message, just a card, with her name signed inside, the card itself being a white winter landscape, simple and clean. I put it on the kitchen windowsill where I could see it when I made coffee in the mornings. I am not sure what it means to keep a card from the woman your husband was sleeping with. I am sure that it means something. I am still working out what. It has been 9 months since Christmas Eve. The divorce is in process. It is proceeding in the way that divorces proceed when the facts are clear and one party has no legal claim to the primary marital asset and both parties have lawyers who are being sensible, slowly, with paperwork, with occasional negotiations about smaller things, with the gradual unknotting of a life that was wound around another life for 6 years. The house is mine. Formally, now, my father began the transfer process in January, and the conversion of the beneficial interest to outright ownership is nearly complete. In a few weeks it will be in my name, only my name, the name of a woman who has lived in it for 6 years and who chose the wreath on the door and the ornaments on the Christmas tree and the particular blue of the kitchen walls that Thomas never liked and that I have always loved. I repainted the bedroom in February. A deep green, almost forest, a color I've wanted since before we moved in and that Thomas vetoed because he said it would feel like sleeping in a tree. It does feel like sleeping in a tree. I sleep very well in it. My parents came back for Easter. My father sat in his armchair in the way he always does, the same armchair, the one Thomas had occupied on Christmas Eve, and read his book with his usual deliberateness, and I looked at him from the kitchen doorway and thought about what it means to be loved well. We have not discussed Christmas Eve extensively. Not because it is unacknowledged, it is acknowledged, it is there, it is part of the texture of what we are to each other now. But my father is not a man who requires his good deeds to be examined at length, and I have inherited enough of that quality to understand the value of leaving some things to exist rather than needing to explain them. What I said to him, at Easter, standing in the kitchen doorway while he read his book, was, "I understand now why you did it." He looked up. "The house," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I hoped you'd understand someday," he said. "I hoped there'd be a long time before you needed to." "There wasn't," I said. "No," he said. "There wasn't." He went back to his book. I went back to the kitchen. Outside, through the window, the garden was doing what gardens do in April, uncertain, tentative, the first green things pushing up through the cold soil with the specific stubbornness of things that have decided to exist regardless of conditions. I have started gardening. This surprises me and would have surprised Thomas and would not surprise my father at all, who gardens with the same deliberate attention he brings to everything, and who once said that gardening was the only activity that required you to think in decades rather than quarters. I am 37 years old. I have a house that is mine and a garden that is starting. I have a divorce in process and a green bedroom and a card on the kitchen windowsill from a woman who is also trying to understand what she was part of. I have a father who sat in an armchair on Christmas Eve and waited, and stood up when the door opened, and whispered 5 words that changed everything. I am not fine, not exactly, not yet. But I am in my own home, and it is genuinely mine, and no one can tell me otherwise. That is, for right now, more than enough. If someone in your life has ever done something quietly, something you didn't fully understand at the time, that only made sense much later, I want you to take a moment to think about that person today. We talk a lot about the people who hurt us. We don't always talk enough about the ones who see what's coming before we do, who act without requiring our thanks, who put themselves in the quiet position of being ready when we need them. If you have that person, tell them. Tell me in the comments, has someone ever protected you in a way you didn't recognize until much later? What was it like to understand it? I read everything. Thank you for being here for this one. Subscribe if this found you. There's always another one coming.